In the sodium-lit underbelly of New Jericho, a city where power was sewn into the seams of blue uniforms and corruption pulsed like the polluted Jericho River carving its scar through the skyline, the red Aston Martin DB11 gleamed like a provocation. Its sleek curves cut through the night, a ruby dart weaving past crumbling tenements, their brick facades pockmarked with graffiti, angry scrawls of rebellion and despair, and neon-lit corner stores flickering with promises of cheap liquor, stale cigarettes and dreams long expired. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Vaughn, a black man in a tailored charcoal suit, his calm demeanor a fortress against the chaos of the urban sprawl. His hands, calloused from years of fieldwork, rested lightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, fingers tracing its grain as his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning with the precision of a predator who knew he was being hunted. The city's pulse throbbed in his ears. Honking horns, the distant wail of sirens, the low rumble of a late-night bus rattling over potholes, the shouts of a street vendor hawking tamales to no one. To Officers Keller and Reyes cruising in, their battered Ford Interceptor, Marcus was an anomaly. A man too polished, too composed, driving a car that screamed wealth in a neighborhood where survival was the only currency. They saw opportunity, not danger, in the Aston Martin's gleam, their prejudice a veil blinding them to the truth. Keller, a wiry veteran of 15 years, wore his sneer like a badge, his sun-weathered face etched with lines of cynicism and cruelty. His eyes, pale and predatory, narrowed as he nudged Reyes, his rookie partner, whose wide brown eyes gleamed with the eager malice of someone desperate to prove himself in New Jericho's unforgiving hierarchy. "Look at this guy," Keller muttered, his voice thick with disdain, tobacco-stained teeth flashing in the dashboard's dim glow. "Rolling through our streets in a car like that, thinking he's untouchable." Reyes, barely 6 months out of the academy, nodded, his fingers twitching toward the radio, his palms sweaty with anticipation. He was still green, his uniform crisp but his confidence fragile, shaped by Keller's mentorship, a twisted education in bending the law to their will. Racial profiling wasn't policy in New Jericho. It was procedure, an unspoken rule etched into every glance, every stop, every falsified report they filed. The Aston Martin was a jackpot, a high-value car, a driver who didn't fit their narrative of who belonged in the shadow of the 12th precinct. They flipped on the sirens, the red and blue lights slicing through the humid night, casting jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt like a warning. Marcus saw them in his rearview mirror, their cruiser tailing him like a hyena scenting blood. He adjusted his tie, the silk cool against his skin, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. The city's humidity clung to him, a second skin of sweat and resolve, but his heartbeat stayed steady, a metronome honed by years of covert operations, in places far darker than New Jericho, Kandahar's dust-choked alleys, Bogota's rain-slicked slums, where trust was a luxury and survival a skill. Marcus Vaughn wasn't just a man with a nice car. He was a Homeland Security agent, deep cover, tasked with rooting out the rot in the 12th precinct. For 9 months, he'd been tracking a network of corrupt cops, funneling seized vehicles into black market auctions, a scheme that reached higher than anyone dared whisper in the city's smoke-filled bars or precinct locker rooms. The traffic stop wasn't a surprise. It was the opening move in a chess game he'd been playing since he first heard whispers of ghost auctions, in a wiretap, a term that haunted his encrypted reports like a specter. He'd chosen this route deliberately, a narrow stretch of Jericho Avenue where Keller's beat was notorious, a street where power was flexed without question, where men like Marcus were seen as targets, not threats. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m., each tick a step closer to the moment he'd been orchestrating. The precinct's corruption was a cancer, metastasizing through badges and bank accounts, and Marcus was the scalpel, sharpened by a life of fighting systems that broke people like his family. He thought of his father, a mechanic in these same streets, who'd dreamed of owning a car like the Aston Martin but died in debt, worn down by a city that chewed up dreamers. He thought of his sister, Tasha, lost to New Jericho's underbelly. A decade ago, her addiction a wound the system had exploited. This mission wasn't just duty. It was personal, a reckoning for every injustice he'd witnessed growing up in the shadow of the city's towers. The air was heavy with exhaust and anticipation as Marcus lowered his window, the motor's hum a soft counterpoint to the cruiser's idling growl. Keller swaggered up, his hand resting on his holster, his posture radiating the arrogance of a man who'd never been challenged. His badge glinted under the streetlight, a tarnished symbol of authority, and his breath carried the faint tang of cheap whiskey. "License and registration," he barked, his tone laced with the authority of a small-time tyrant, his eyes scanning Marcus for any sign of defiance. Marcus complied, his movements deliberate, almost performative, as he handed over the documents, their edges worn from months of calculated use. His eyes locked onto Keller's, a quiet intensity that made the officer shift uncomfortably, his sneer faltering for a split second. A crack in his armor Marcus noted and filed away. Reyes circled the car, snapping photos of the plates with his phone, muttering about suspicious behavior to justify the stop, his voice shaky but eager to please his mentor. Marcus's mind was already 5 steps ahead, mapping their every move, their every word, as if they were pieces on a board he'd designed. He'd spent years in the shadows, learning to turn predators into prey, his training a mosaic of CIA hand-to-hand combat, MI6 surveillance techniques, and Homeland's digital warfare protocols. New Jericho was no different from those foreign battlefields, just another war zone dressed in concrete and neon, its soldiers wearing badges instead of fatigues. Keller's flashlight beam danced across the car's interior, searching for a flaw. Drugs, a weapon, anything to escalate the stop. But Marcus's calm was a fortress, unyielding, built from years of facing men like Keller in places where justice was a myth. Reyes's radio crackled, reporting the stop to dispatch, but Marcus knew the real report was being whispered elsewhere, to someone higher up, someone who'd greenlit this hustle, someone whose name was buried in the files he'd been chasing. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette of ambition and decay, its glass towers mocking the poverty below. Marcus's thoughts drifted to his handler, Agent Clara Nguyen, a sharp-eyed veteran who'd warned him about New Jericho's reach. "This isn't just a precinct, Marcus. It's a machine, and it eats its own." Her voice echoed in his head. As Keller leaned closer, his flashlight blinding, his voice dripping with menace. "Where'd you get a car like this, huh? Doesn't look like it belongs to you." Marcus's lips twitched, not a smile but a shadow of one. His silence, a weapon. That unnerved Keller more than any retort. The officer stepped back, rattled, and barked at Reyes to run the plates faster. The rookie fumbled with his phone, his nerves betraying him under Keller's glare. Marcus's cover was airtight. A fabricated identity as a tech entrepreneur, complete with falsified bank records and a penthouse lease in the city's gentrified North End. But he knew men like Keller didn't care about truth. They saw skin, a car, a suit, and wrote their own story. The stop was textbook, a play from the precinct's unwritten manual. But Marcus had written his own script. He'd baited them with the Aston Martin, knowing its allure would draw them in, knowing their greed would blind them to the trap. The city's underbelly stretched beyond the window, a junkie slumped in an alley, a neon open sign flickering. Like a lie, a mural of a dove peeling from a wall, and Marcus felt the weight of it all. The lives crushed by the system he was here to dismantle. As Keller returned his documents, his voice laced with a warning. "We're watching you." Marcus's eyes flicked to the dashboard, where a hidden switch lay dormant, waiting for his signal. They thought they were hunting a suspect, a mark to be fleeced for their underground empire. In truth, they'd just stepped into the crosshairs of a man trained to dismantle empires, a man whose life had been shaped by loss and forged in fire, a man who knew the only way to fight a broken system was to break it harder. The cruisers. Lights faded as they pulled away, but Marcus's work was just beginning. The warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows, each corner hiding potential threats, more enforcers, dirty cops, or worse, a trap set by someone who knew they were coming. Marcus's breath was steady, his training a lifeline, but his gut twisted as he noticed Elena's hesitation, her hand lingering on her radio as if waiting for a signal that never came. The guard's blood pooled on the concrete, dark and viscous, a reminder of the cost of this mission. Marcus thought of his training. In Quantico, the instructor who'd drilled into him that hesitation is death, and wondered if Elena's pause was doubt or something darker. The Aston Martin stood like a sentinel, its presence a taunt to the men who thought they'd claimed it, its transmitters still active, feeding data to Patel's team. Marcus's earpiece buzzed faintly, Patel's voice cutting through. "We've got movement on the east side, 3 heat signatures heading for a vehicle." The words were a jolt, sharpening Marcus's focus as he signaled Elena to flank the exit. Then, movement. A side door banged open, the sound sharp as a gunshot, and 2 figures sprinted toward a black Chevy Tahoe parked in the lot's far corner. Keller and Reyes, their faces pale with panic, their breaths clouding in the cold dawn air. Keller's jacket flapped as he ran, his gun drawn but held loosely, his bravado gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man who'd miscalculated his invincibility. Reyes stumbled, his rookie nerves betraying him, his hands fumbling for the SUV's door, his boots slipping on the gravel. Marcus raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger, the weight of the Glock familiar in his hands, its recoil a memory etched into his muscles. The shot rang out, a sharp crack that split the morning air, but the bullet grazed the Tahoe's fender, sparking against the metal and missing its mark. The vehicle roared to life, tires screeching as it tore out of the lot, kicking up gravel. Like shrapnel, the sound fading into the dawn's eerie quiet. Marcus cursed under his breath, his eyes catching a third figure in the Tahoe's back seat, his silhouette unmistakable through the tinted glass. Captain Daniel Monahan, the 12th. Precinct's decorated leader, a man whose name had surfaced too many times in Marcus's encrypted reports. Monahan was a legend in New Jericho, a community hero with a chest full of medals, his face plastered on billboards for national night-out events, his speeches about law and order quoted in the Jericho Herald. But Marcus's intel painted a different picture, a kingpin hiding behind a badge, orchestrating a network that turned seized cars into cartel cash. His influence a web that ensnared cops, judges, and even feds. The captain's presence in the Tahoe confirmed it. This wasn't just a cop racket skimming profits. It was a conspiracy that reached into the heart of Homeland Security itself, a cover-up shielding Monahan's empire from scrutiny. Marcus thought of the informants who'd vanished, their files marked closed by unseen hands, their families left with empty promises. One of them, a mechanic named Javier Ortiz, had been Marcus's childhood friend. His tip about the impound lot the first thread Marcus had pulled. Javier's body was found in the river a week later, his death ruled a suicide despite the bruises on his knuckles. The memory fueled Marcus's resolve, his grip tightening on his weapon as he scanned the lot for more threats. Elena's hand twitched toward her radio again, a movement so subtle Marcus might have missed it if he hadn't been watching. His doubt grew, a seed planted in the warehouse's shadows, fertilized by the weight of the mission. The Tahoe's taillights vanished into the haze, but the Aston Martin's data was still streaming, a lifeline to the truth. The warehouse fell silent, a tomb of secrets, its walls scarred with bullet holes and smeared with oil. Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena, her face unreadable, her eyes avoiding his. The dawn sky was streaked with gold now, the city waking to another day of lies, oblivious to the war being fought in its shadows. Marcus thought of Clara Nguyen's warning. Monahan's not the top. Someone's protecting him, someone with real power. The name Samuel Nash flickered in his mind, a ghost he wasn't ready to face. The raid had been a victory, but it was incomplete, the real battle looming like the skyline in the distance. The Aston Martin stood as a silent witness, its red paint a challenge to the men who thought they'd won, and Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Back at their safe house, a cramped apartment above a shuttered bodega in New Jericho's Iron District, Marcus pored over the files they'd seized from the warehouse, encrypted drives, falsified logs, grainy photos of vehicles changing hands in shadowy deals under overpasses, in abandoned lots, and at docks where the river's stench masked the smell of greed. The safe house was a sanctuary turned cage, its walls lined with maps, surveillance photos, and red string connecting names, dates, and bank accounts like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. The air smelled of burnt coffee, old leather, and the faint tang of gun oil, the table cluttered with takeout containers and laptops humming with decrypted data. The evidence was damning, a mosaic of corruption that implicated dozens. Cops, cartel enforcers, city officials, but one name stood out like a wound: Director Samuel Nash, Marcus's former mentor at Homeland Security. Nash had been a father figure, a grizzled veteran who'd seen potential in a young Marcus, fresh from New Jericho's slums, and guided him through the agency's labyrinth. Their late-night talks in D.C. over whiskey and case files had shaped Marcus's sense of justice, Nash's gravelly voice preaching that the system's flawed, but we fix it from within. Now the files revealed a darker truth. Nash had been burying Monahan's misconduct for years, rerouting Marcus's reports, erasing leads, and shielding the captain with bureaucratic sleight of hand. Every mission Marcus had run, every risk he'd taken, raids in Yemen, stings in Moscow, had been undermined by the man he'd trusted most, a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet, leaving a wound that bled doubt and rage. The real blow came when Marcus found the footage. A grainy surveillance clip, pulled from a hacked city camera near the riverfront, showed Elena meeting Monahan in a deserted parking garage, her posture tense but familiar, as if the meeting wasn't her first. The timestamp, 3 weeks ago, days before Marcus had shared his suspicions about Monahan, burned into his retinas, each second a hammer blow to the trust they'd built. The safe house's dim kitchen became a battleground as Marcus confronted her, the air thick with the weight of his accusation. "You were never just my partner," he said, his voice low, a blade wrapped in velvet. His eyes locked on hers, searching for the woman he'd fought beside. "You were Nash's plant." The words hung between them, heavy as the maps pinned to the walls, the fluorescent light buzzing like a trapped insect, casting harsh shadows on Elena's face. Elena didn't flinch, but her face, usually a mask of defiance, softened with something like regret, her scar catching the light as she stepped closer. The safe house was suffocating now, the walls closing in as Marcus replayed the footage in his mind, each frame a dagger to their partnership. He remembered Elena's laugh, sharp and unguarded, during a stakeout in Chicago when they'd shared a thermos of coffee under a frozen sky. He remembered her saving his life in Miami, tackling a gunman who'd caught him off guard, her breath hot against his ear as she whispered, "You owe me." Now those memories were tainted, poisoned by the possibility of deceit. "I was protecting you," Elena said, her voice steady but her eyes glistening with unshed tears, a rare crack in her armor. Her hands clenched at her sides to hide their trembling. She admitted she'd known about Nash's corruption, had been feeding him just enough to keep Marcus off his radar while she gathered proof of her own. A dangerous game played in the shadows of power, a tightrope walk over a pit of betrayal. The kitchen's light flickered, revealing lines of exhaustion on her face, the toll of a double life etched into her skin. Elena's own history, discharged from the Marines after questioning a corrupt officer, recruited by Homeland for her. Grit mirrored Marcus's, a shared defiance that had bound them until now. "If I'd stepped in too soon," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "Nash would have vanished the evidence. He'd have vanished you." The words landed like a punch, and Marcus thought of the agents who'd disappeared, their names redacted, their families left with nothing but questions. Agents like Sarah Kim, whose desk had sat next to his, her laughter silenced after a training accident. Marcus never believed. Marcus's hand hovered over his holster, instinct warring with loyalty, his mind racing through every moment they'd shared, late-night stakeouts, whispered plans, the unspoken bond of soldiers in a war no one else saw. The files, Nash's emails, Monahan's orders, bank transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans, screamed of a conspiracy that reached beyond the precinct, into the agency Marcus had sworn to serve. He thought of Javier Ortiz, his childhood friend whose tip about the impound lot had cost him his life, his body pulled from the river with bruises no suicide could explain. Elena stepped closer, her hand outstretched, her voice a plea and a challenge. "We're in too deep to stop. Now Nash, Monahan, they're the same poison. We cut it out together." The Aston Martin wasn't just a car. It was a lure, a meticulously crafted piece of bait designed to hook New Jericho's corrupt and drag them kicking into the light. Marcus had known they'd bite the moment he rolled onto Keller's turf. The car's crimson paint, a deliberate taunt in a city where flash was a synonym for weakness to men like them. The moment Keller and Reyes pulled him over, they'd activated a sequence Marcus had spent weeks orchestrating with Homeland Security's tech division, a plan born in late-night briefings in a D.C. safe house, fueled by black coffee and the weight of a city's betrayal. As they cuffed him, Keller's grip unnecessarily tight, his fingers digging into Marcus's wrists with a petty cruelty that spoke of personal grudges, Marcus let them play their roles. He let them tow the car to their impound lot, let them believe they'd scored another victory in their illicit empire, their laughter echoing in the night as they drove him to the precinct. The cuffs bit into his skin, cold and unyielding, a familiar sensation from his early days undercover when he'd posed as a smuggler to infiltrate a cartel in Juarez. Marcus's expression remained unreadable, his silence a weapon sharper than their bravado, his eyes tracking every detail. Keller's chipped tooth, Reyes's nervous tick of rubbing his thumb against his index finger, the faint cartel tattoo on the tow truck driver's neck. The precinct's lot was a graveyard of stolen dreams, cars seized under false pretenses, their owners silenced by threats or worse. Reyes leaned against the Aston Martin, snapping photos of the vine with his phone, his movements sloppy with overconfidence, his breath visible in the chilly air. Keller called in a report laced with lies, erratic driving, suspicious behavior, his voice dripping with the casual corruption of a man who'd done this 100 times. His burner phone already buzzing with a contact Marcus knew was tied to the cartel. They didn't notice the faint hum beneath the car's hood, the microscopic transmitters embedded in its frame, each one a marvel of military-grade engineering developed by Homeland's R&D team in Langley. Every word they spoke, every move they made was being recorded, streamed live to a secure server far from New Jericho's reach, a digital net tightening around their necks, 3 states away, in a dimly lit Homeland Security bunker buried beneath a nondescript office park in Ohio. A technician named Raj Patel leaned toward his monitor, his glasses reflecting the green glow of data streams. His fingers paused over the keyboard, a rare smile tugging at his lips as a light blinked on his screen, synced to the signal Marcus had activated the moment the cuffs clicked shut. "He took the bait," Patel said into his headset, his voice steady but tinged with the thrill of a hunter closing in. The bunker's air was stale, filled with the hum of servers and the faint buzz of encrypted comms, a sterile contrast to New Jericho's grime. Patel's team, 6 analysts, each a specialist in digital forensics, worked in shifts, their screens alive with the Aston Martin's feed, audio of Keller boasting about the car's street value, video from hidden lenses capturing Reyes's clumsy VIN photos, GPS coordinates plotting the car's path to a cartel-linked auction. Patel's own history with corruption, his cousin, a cop in Cleveland, gunned down for refusing a bribe, drove his precision, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he relayed the data to a second team in D.C., analysts already mapping the network's tentacles. The Aston Martin's transmitters were invisible to the untrained eye, woven into the car's chassis like veins in a living thing, their signals bouncing off encrypted satellites to avoid detection. They captured not just audio, Keller's crude jokes about flipping the car for a 6-figure profit, Reyes's nervous laughter betraying his inexperience, but high-definition video, thermal imaging, even the faint electromagnetic signatures of the officers' phones. Marcus had chosen the car for its allure, a beacon to greedy eyes, but its true power was in its silence, a digital ghost haunting their every move. The tow truck driver, Tommy Vega, a grizzled ex-con with cartel tattoos, peeking from his sleeve, was another link in the chain, his presence noted in Marcus's mental ledger. Tommy's rap sheet, drug trafficking assault, had crossed Marcus's desk weeks ago, a clue to the cartel's grip on the precinct's impound system. Marcus, still in the patrol car's back seat, the vinyl sticky with years of grime, counted The seconds, each one a step closer to their undoing. The city outside was a blur of decay. A junkie slumped in an alley, clutching a syringe like a lifeline. A neon open sign flickering above a pawn shop. A mural of a child's face, half defaced, staring blankly at the passing cars. He thought of Tasha, his sister, whose addiction had been fed by these streets, her life stolen by the same system Marcus was fighting. Her memory was a fire that kept him sharp, a reminder of why he'd taken this mission when Clara Nguyen had offered it in a DC diner 6 months ago. "New Jericho's dirty, Marcus," she'd said, sliding a file across the table. "But it's not just the cops, it's the feds too. You're the only one I trust to cut through the noise." The recordings were already painting a damning picture. Keller's voice, smug and careless, detailing his cut, Reyes's fumbling agreement, his rookie nerves cracking under Keller's pressure. A third voice on Keller's burner phone, low and authoritative, arranging the car's transfer to a buyer in less than 48 hours. Each word was a nail in their coffin, each location a pin on Marcus's mental map, a grid he'd built through months of infiltrating their world as a low-level fixer named Malik Carter, a cover so deep even his handlers sometimes forgot his real name. The precinct's holding cell awaited him, a formality he'd endure to keep the ruse alive, its walls etched with the names of those who'd passed through, victims of a system that profited from their despair. Marcus's thoughts drifted to his early days at Homeland, a fresh-faced recruit mentored by Samuel Nash, the man who'd seen potential in a kid from New Jericho's slums. Nash's betrayal, still a rumor in Marcus's files, loomed like a storm cloud, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the trap. The Aston Martin wasn't just a car, it was a Trojan horse, carrying the evidence that would unravel their operation, thread by thread. As the tow truck hauled it away, its engine a guttural roar in the night, Marcus closed his eyes, visualizing Patel's bunker, the data streaming like a river that would drown them all. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they processed him, but Marcus was already elsewhere, his mind a battlefield where every move was calculated. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a hunter, and the trap was closing tighter with every second. The trail led to a cartel-linked impound lot on New Jericho's eastern edge, a sprawling fortress of chain-link fences topped with razor wire, rusted car hulks stacked like tombstones, and floodlights that cast long, jagged shadows across the gravel. The air was thick with the scent of oil, decay, and something sharper, fear maybe, or the residue of deals done in the dark, blood money changing hands under the guise of law. It was dawn, the sky bruised purple, the first light glinting off the warehouse's corrugated walls, a cold reminder of the stakes. Marcus and his partner, Elena Ruiz, moved like specters through the pre-dawn haze, their boots silent on the uneven ground, their breaths clouding in the chill. Elena, a wiry ex-Marine with a scar above her left eyebrow from a shrapnel wound in Fallujah, checked her sidearm, a Glock 19, her jaw tight, her eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting an ambush. They'd been partners for 2 years. Their trust forged in fire, raids in Miami's Little Havana, stakeouts in Chicago's South Side. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Elena's glances were too quick, her silences too heavy, like she was carrying a secret heavier than the Kevlar vest beneath her jacket. The raid was surgical, a ballet of precision honed by years of training under fire. They breached the gate, with bolt cutters, the metal snapping with a dull clang, and silenced the alarms with a device Patel had rigged, a black box the size of a phone, its code bypassing the lot's outdated security. The masked guards, cartel enforcers moonlighting as security, fell under controlled bursts of gunfire, their bodies crumpling to the gravel, their radios crackling with static cut off mid-sentence. The warehouse echoed with the chaos of their assault. Shell casings clattered to the concrete floor, the air thick with the acrid sting of cordite, the fluorescence flickering like a dying star. Amid stacks of stolen vehicles, BMWs with slashed tires, Porsches stripped for parts, a Bentley with a bullet hole in its hood, they found the Aston Martin, its red paint gleaming under the flickering lights like a beacon in a sea of wreckage. Marcus's pulse quickened. not from fear, but from the thrill of being so close to the heart of the conspiracy. The car, a tangible link to the empire he'd sworn to dismantle. Marcus's thoughts churned, a storm of doubt and resolve. He remembered Nash's lessons, the way he'd framed every mission as a chess game. But now Marcus saw the board clearly, and Nash was no longer the grandmaster. He was a pawn, protecting, a kingpin. Elena's betrayal was calculated, born of a loyalty to a cause bigger than either of them. But it didn't dull the sting, the ache of a partnership fractured. He lowered his hand from the holster, his voice steel. Then we end this together. Elena nodded, her eyes meeting his with a resolve that matched his own, a silent pact forged in the ruins of trust. The safe house felt smaller now, the weight of their mission pressing against the walls, the city outside oblivious to the war brewing in its heart. Marcus thought of his father, working himself to death in a garage, his hands stained with grease, but his dreams clean. He thought of Tasha, her smile fading as the streets claimed her, her memory a fire that burned brighter than any betrayal. This was bigger than Elena, bigger than Nash. It was about dismantling a system that thrived on broken promises, a machine that crushed the vulnerable to feed the powerful. The safe house's windows rattled as a train roared past, its light slicing through the dawn, and Marcus felt the city's pulse sync with his own, a rhythm of resistance. They were bound now, not by trust, but by a shared purpose to bring down Nash, Monahan, and the empire they'd built on lies, a purpose that would either save them or destroy them both. The smuggler's cabin was a rotting husk in the woods. 30 miles from New Jericho's pulse, its sagging roof and splintered walls swallowed by towering pines that whispered secrets in the wind. No sirens heralded their approach, no backup waited in the wings. Marcus and Elena were alone, their breaths visible in the chilly night air, their shadows blending with the trees as they moved with the silent grace of predators. The cabin's windows glowed faintly, the flicker of a lantern casting silhouettes of two men inside. Keller and Reyes, counting cash from their latest auction, their voices muffled through the thin walls, laced with greed and paranoia. The air smelled of damp wood, pine resin, and the faint metallic tang of gun oil, a reminder of the violence to come. Marcus's boots crunched softly on the forest floor, his Glock heavy in his hand, his pulse steady, but his mind alive with the weight of the mission. Elena flanked him, her own weapon drawn, her scar pale in the moonlight, her eyes scanning. For threats, her silence a mirror of the doubts they'd left unresolved. The raid was brutal and swift, a storm of fists and fury unleashed in the cabin's cramped interior. Marcus kicked in the door, the wood splintering under his boot with a crack that echoed like thunder, and Elena followed, her movements precise, a dancer in a deadly ballet. Keller lunged for a shotgun propped against the wall, his face twisted with defiance, but Marcus was faster, his fist cracking against the officer's jaw, sending him sprawling across a table cluttered with cash and burner phones. Reyes, cowering in the corner, dropped a stack of bills, the money scattering like leaves across the warped floorboards, his hands raised in surrender, his rookie bravado shattered. The air filled with the metallic snap of handcuffs locking tight, the sound sharper than the gunfire that had preceded it, a punctuation mark on their empire's collapse. The cabin's walls creaked under the wind's weight, the lantern's flame flickering as if sensing the end of an era. Keller spat blood, his face swollen and defiant, but his eyes betrayed fear, the realization of a man who'd underestimated his prey. "You took my car," Marcus said, his voice a low growl, his knuckles bruised and raw from the fight, each punch a release of the rage he'd carried since Tasha's death. "Now I take your empire." Reyes babbled apologies, his voice cracking, his hands trembling as he begged for mercy, but Marcus's eyes were cold, his focus absolute, a hunter standing over his kill. The evidence they'd gathered, recordings from the Aston Martin's transmitters, falsified seizure reports, photos of cartel handoffs at the docks, was airtight, a digital noose around the necks of everyone involved, from Keller's street-level hustle to Monahan's precinct throne. The cabin was a microcosm of New Jericho's decay, its walls scarred with knife marks, its floor stained with spills of whiskey and blood. Marcus thought of Javier Ortiz, whose laughter had filled their childhood, now silenced by the river's cold embrace. He thought of Clara Nguyen, waiting in D.C. for his report, her faith in him a lifeline across the miles. The evidence was already uploaded to secure servers, a ticking bomb set to detonate across New Jericho's airwaves, its files detailing everything: falsified seizures, ghost auctions, Nash's encrypted orders to protect Monahan's operation, bank accounts, linked to cartel fronts in Panama and Belize. Elena stood guard at the door, her silhouette framed by moonlight, her gun steady but her face haunted by the choices that had led them here. Her betrayal, her redemption, a ledger she'd balance in her own way. The fallout was seismic. By sunrise, New Jericho was ablaze with the scandal. The evidence splashed across every news outlet, from gritty local blogs like the Jericho Pulse to national networks like CNN, their anchors dissecting the 12th Precinct conspiracy with grim fascination. News vans converged on the city, reporters hungry for the story that would topple giants, their cameras capturing the chaos as SWAT teams stormed Monahan's precinct, officers scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal, their badges tarnished by association. Samuel Nash was arrested in his D.C. office, his tailored suit wrinkled as he was led away in cuffs, his face a mask of disbelief as his empire crumbled, his name trending on X as Traitor Nash. Monahan was cornered in a safe house by the river, his medals meaningless as he faced a tactical team, his surrender broadcast live to a city that had once called him hero. Marcus stood outside the 12th Precinct, the morning sun casting long shadows. Across the pavement, the city waking to a new reality, its air electric with change. He thought of his father, whose hands had built cars but never owned one, and Tasha, whose smile had been stolen by the streets these men profited from. The system that had tried to break him lay in ruins, its architects exposed, its secrets laid bare. Elena stood beside him, silent, their partnership scarred but unbroken, a fragile alliance forged in the fire of justice. The Aston Martin sat in the precinct lot, its red paint catching the light, untouched, a silent testament to the trap that had brought an empire to its knees. Marcus's earpiece buzzed, Clara Nguyen's voice cutting through. "You did it, Marcus. But this is just the beginning. There's more out there, higher up." He nodded, though she couldn't see, his eyes on the skyline, its towers gleaming like knives. The cabin, the warehouse, the traffic stop. They were battles in a war that wasn't over, a war against a machine that rebuilt itself stronger each time it fell. Marcus felt Tasha's memory beside him, a ghost urging him forward, and knew he'd fight on, not for glory, but for the city that had shaped him, broken him, and made him whole again. The Aston Martin's engine purred as he approached it, a promise of the road ahead, and Marcus slid into the driver's seat, ready for the next move.